All right, and we are live. So, welcome. My name is Michael Lassen, and I have the huge pleasure of welcoming Rich Schefren, one of the. And I've been a client for I think 6 years, and I usually joke that I paid Rich or I spend more money with Rich than I have on my wife, which is not always that happy about. um, just a very quick introduction before we go into tonight's topic, which is the future of marketing. Rich got famous in the internet marketing world around 7, 8 years ago when he created a coaching program where he promised the participants to double their income and make their workload, cut it basically in half. And he succeeded with that. And a lot of those people who are in the program are now some of the big names in internet marketing. Then he went on to make quite a number of different predictions that has turned out to be true in terms of marketing and internet marketing, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And he's generally known as someone who the big names go to for advice, and I can only vouch for that myself. Whenever I ask him something, I'm always amazed about how precise it is. Sometimes I secretly have an idea that he is psychic, but I don't think he will admit that if he is. And normally Rich charges $3,000 an hour, and I actually know that because I've seen some of the invoices, and it's absolutely worth it. So we have an hour of Rich time tonight, maybe a little bit more, to talk about the future of marketing, and what better topic to pick Rich brain on. So welcome, Rich, and thank you so much for doing this as part of Elevate 2014.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So what I have planned is to talk about some different subjects that in some ways are going to be evergreen in marketing, and hear your views on them and how they will move into the future. And then a little bit about what other observations you have, and then we're going to talk about your new breakthrough that you've come up with during the last 2-3 years, which is also something you'll present at Elevate. And then at the very end, if people are curious about Elevate, they will get a very special offer.
Great.
Okay, so the future of marketing, that's a big topic. What do you see as some of the most important things that we have to pay attention to moving into the future?
Well, I think it's, for the most part, it's more of the same. But what I would say is that, and this is something that I've taught for quite a number of years, and that is that because of the way the internet has evolved, that people are spread out, like your prospects are spread out more. There is less the ability to aggregate a large number of them in one fell swoop, and that you need to be in more places with more messages more often. And what happens is that as an entrepreneur tries to do that, if they don't do that effectively, they end up really spreading themselves thin and being quite ineffective across the board. So what I would say to anyone that has a business now or is trying to start a business about what the future of marketing is really going to bring, it's going to bring more. It's going to bring more places, more options, more mediums, more places that really you should be if you want to be known in your niche, if you want to attract the clients that you want, if you want to have the business that you want. And in order to do that effectively, what you need to do is you really need to maximize the leverage that you get. And you do that by, one, recognizing that people go online to get something. Even if they're not necessarily looking for your product at that point, they're looking for something, whether it's to be entertained, whether it's to get information, or get advice, connect with friends. They're looking for something. And what you want to do is you want to create something that has really high value, that helps move people closer to wanting what it is you have to offer or wanting to learn more about you and so forth. And what most people do incorrectly, in my opinion, is that they produce more than they should, because in producing more than they should, the quality and the power of what they produce is less effective. So what needs to happen is that you really have to, one, understand your prospects, which we can talk about or not talk about, but the idea is really to understand who they are, what they're all about, what turns them on, what they're looking for, what are the issues that they have that kind of gnaw away at them, and to create something that really resonates with them, that makes you relevant because what you create is relevant, and to make it the best that you possibly can. And then instead of putting that in one place, figuring out the best way to have that in every place, so that instead of different messages all over the place, all of minimal depth and minimal power, that you create something that is powerful enough that it stands above and beyond, and you get that in as many different formats in as many different places as you possibly can. So, it's like I built my entire business on one report that then morphed into other things, but it was one report. And that can be done today. It's just that I would need to turn that report into a video, into a podcast, into articles, but it would all stem from that one great piece that really drives the marketing and drives the desire on the side of your prospects for more. And you can look at your own experiences to really guide you into what that needs to be. So like right now, for example, I'm really into a certain type of philosophy, and last night as I was on YouTube, I came across a presentation that blew me away, and my next move was to find every presentation that person gave and to go to his website and everything else, because it was that much better than everything else that I had seen. And I think everyone's had that experience. You want to create that experience for your prospects, and the way you do that is by doing less, but with what you do less of, having it show up in more places.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about social media, because
Okay.
that has obviously been part of what you're talking about, getting out to many places, and it's growing all the time, almost exponentially, it seems like. How do you see the role of social media, and should people pick the different outlets that fits them or their personality, or fits the one where their sort of core clients are, or how do you see it?
Well, each type of site has like pros and cons about it. I think that you need a presence on most, but not when you're first starting out. It certainly is not absolutely critical or necessary. In certain places, like for example, obviously Facebook, there are ways to get a following which are really useful. But then you have sites like Instagram that are now becoming more popular, that people are actually recognizing that these briefer, shorter messages with photos can actually move people in a pretty significant way. And I was talking to someone just 2 days ago that has built quite a few successful businesses just through Instagram. So there's opportunities, I would say, in most mediums, most formats. But to your point, I would say that you really should pick you should have two criteria. Does it work for me? Like, does the audience that use this type of site really are what they're looking for, what I have to provide? And the other is, not only does it work for you, but is your type of prospect, your type of client on there? Now, as far as advertising goes, you want to advertise in these places. Like, Facebook has become an incredibly great place to advertise. But whether or not Facebook should be the primary way that you establish your authority or credibility is open for discussion based on what it is you're trying to achieve. You know, if you are in, let's say, the health niche, you would obviously want to be on Facebook, but you might be better off actually in Instagram. And, you know, or if you're in the clothing niche or fashion niche. So it just really depends on what your outcome is. But, you know, obviously social media is not going away. It's only getting bigger. And you know, there are lots of ways to approach it. And I think time will only tell what is the best way. I think it's still too early, and I know that that might be surprising to people that that I'm saying that, but I think that there really is, there's still a lot that has to be worked out about what is the best way to leverage all these social media platforms in a way that really grows your business. And it's points back to what I was saying earlier, that there's just going to be more and more of these different outlets that you have to be at. But the question is like, what are you going to be on that outlet, and can you do it in a way where everything is integrated and you're putting out such great stuff on a less frequent basis that it has the power ultimately to drive your business. And I think that what people might be missing about that is that one of the benefits of creating like something of high value that really stands out is that you build fans. And then as you build fans on these different channels, they'll spend time talking about you, which decreases your workload somewhat about how much time you need to spend talking about yourself. And that really should be the goal. You should be looking at social media, if I had to kind of sum it up, is that your goal is to turn your prospects into your best marketers for you. So if you can do that, it requires a lot less work on your part to be as relentless and always showing up and being there.
Yeah, and I guess that's also one of the reasons is that if people hear something really impressive from a fan or someone, it there might not be any sort of defense mechanism, but if they hear it from the person themselves, it can be interpreted as bragging or tooting your own horn and things like that, right?
Sure, and you know, the whole point of social media is for friends to connect and share stuff, and so when you're able to leverage that, that really is it's just a much more powerful strategy. And you know, then the question is, how do you do that? And you know, we could have a whole discussion just about that.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that really, on the, like, to just summarize it pretty quickly, offer things of high value that are counterintuitive. Counterintuitive being not common everyday wisdom, that, you know, visually appealing, aesthetically pleasing is always like useful as well, but something that when somebody comes into contact with, their desire is to share it with others, either because it makes them look more interesting by sharing it, or because it is clear that if they gave it to other people, it would either brighten their day, make them happy, give them some insight, or something to that effect. So if you always remember that what your goal is not to necessarily just impact the person, but to impact them enough that they go ahead and share it, it's a better way of thinking about it. You know, there's a very famous lawyer here in the United States who worked on a lot of the big cases, supposedly never lost a case. His name is Jerry Spence, and he's written some great books. And one of the things I remember him talking about or writing about in his book was that when he gave his closing arguments, he was not just trying to convince the jury. He was trying to arm the jury so that the people that agreed with him would be able to argue for his client's behalf when just the jury was alone deciding on the case. And it's kind of the same thing here. We're trying to arm our prospects with material, like so that they can spread our word.
So that also means that it has to be kept simple, or at least somewhat simple, right? So people have the chance of spreading it without fearing not being able to deliver the full point or the full power behind the
Yeah, it
message.
has to be simple. It can't seem too commercial. I mean, there's a, I mean, what would you want to pass along to a friend is a great, just barometer. It was something I teach in a lot of, that dovetails into a lot of different areas, is that which is most personal is most general. So you can always look at yourself, look at your own experiences, and use that as a guiding kind of force for you to move and make decisions about what is appropriate, what's not appropriate. When, if you're going to try and get prospects to pass something along, when has something impacted you that you've passed along?
Mm.
And what, like, why did you pass that along? Like, what was it about it? And how did that, like, how was it achieved? And how can you then reverse engineer that and do the same?
Yeah, so I love that quote with that which is most personal is most general. So is that also a trend you see going into the future, that there's going to be much more value in attracting people that you understand deeply or you have some common ground with, because you're going to be able to articulate their problems, their challenges, their frustration much better than the competition?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, most, it's a human need to be understood, and to be acknowledged.
Mm.
And that, for the most part, people don't feel that understood. They don't. They feel somewhat disconnected. Not everyone, obviously, but the majority. And so, the, I would say that when you're able to have your prospects feel like you understand them, by whatever that means, or you know what they're looking for, or you know what it's like to be them, or you know what they're struggling with. It really depends on what kind of business you have. Um, that is, that's always been very powerful, and my belief is it'll just become even that more powerful. And it's like when in the first 2 years of Strategic Profits, I wrote, I don't know, 6, 7 reports, however many free reports that we put out there that really built the whole business. Primarily the first one, and then there was a series. And one of the things I, would get back from people, and I still to this day, when people read those reports, is that it feels like you were sitting over my shoulder.
Mm.
And I want, everyone watching right now to think about what that feels like as a prospect. That if you're struggling with someone and you come, I'm sorry, if you're struggling with something and you come across something that clearly articulates the struggle that you've had, or the challenge that you've had, or the difficulty that you've had, or even the outcome that you want that you've never really seen expressed like that. Think of the power that that has in forging a connection between you and the prospect, and why that would incentivize the prospect to want to spread it as well as connect with you. And that's really, the name of the game. I think a lot of times, people, marketing is about the masses, right, as opposed to selling, which can be more individual. What I think a lot of people make the mistake of is then making marketing for the masses.
Mm.
Like, it becomes like this anonymous herd, as opposed to an individual conversation. And like, what would you say to a specific individual sitting across from you, and how can you package that in a way in your marketing? And it is because it is a, you're trying to forge a personal relationship in mass, and that's only done by not having it feel like it's in mass, and by being by coming from a place of connection that really doesn't look at people as an anonymous herd, but looks at them as an individual.
Yeah, and that makes me think about one of the other hot topics that's talked about a lot these days, which is the whole be authentic, be congruent with who you are, which also makes, I think, doing social media stuff a whole lot easier. So how do you see that whole thing about being authentic and the power of that, both with social media and and focusing in more on your core clients?
Well, you know, that opens like a big can of worms. So let me share like some initial thoughts. Um, there is, you know, obviously authenticity is something that we all crave, and we all basically abhor the idea that we're inauthentic.
Mm.
Um, and so we fight to not be that way. Now, if we fight to not be that way, just from a perception standpoint, it can be very tiring and ultimately not that effective. The what you really want the relationship that an entrepreneur should have to their business is one of a life-defining project, if we're going to talk about it from that perspective. And I don't want to get too heady here, so I might get heady for about a minute or two and then kind of pull it back. There is, I'm going to go over a couple concepts here quick. There is the way that each and every one of us have wound up being. That's who we are today. That we wound up being. And it's a reflection of everything that we've ever experienced and what we thought about it and so forth. And that's our hardwiring in our brain at this moment in time. And that's the way we wound up being. And in addition to the way we wound up being, it also is the paradigm or the worldview or the perspective that we live in. So we have like the way our brain has been wired, and we have the paradigm that we live in that dictates what we see and what we don't see. And one of the ways that you're able to transcend the way you wound up being, to be better than that, to be a better entrepreneur, to be more effective, to be more successful, and so on, is that you have to transcend the way you wound up being. And the easiest way to do that is to find a cause that is bigger than yourself. You see a lot of people like see Gandhi or they see Martin Luther King, and they think that those guys were heroes that had something special. No, they had a way that they wound up being, but they were committed to a cause that was bigger than themselves, that had them become something else. And so entrepreneurs have this great opportunity to have the cause that's bigger than themselves be the same cause that their business serves. And when that is integrated, right, when the cause that's bigger than you is what your business is partly about, then it calls forth from you to operate in a better way. It takes you out of your comfort zone, and by doing that consistently, you actually rewire your brain. It also can give you the opportunity to learn new things, new distinctions that will adjust your paradigm so you can actually see the world differently. First being that you're now committed to something bigger than just yourself, this cause. And this cause bigger than yourself that is in alignment with what your business is about, when those two come together, not only are you more effective, not only are you more persuasive, not only are you more disciplined, not only are you that much more magnetic, charismatic, etc., but it also has you be much more authentic. And so by kind of going at it in a way that is not necessarily the way that most people think about it, right? Like, I need to be more authentic. I need to convey that authenticity so that people know, like, and trust me. Instead of thinking about it like that, if you can think about what would be a life-defining project for you, a cause bigger than yourself, how does that integrate into your business? And if you can combine those two, and you know you did it right, when it has you become more authentic, when it has you take actions that you were unwilling to take before, when it has you consistently be growing. So it's not a direct answer, I think, to what you're asking me, but that would be my best answer, like, for everyone watching, that there is an opportunity for you to be much better than who you currently are, which is the way you wound up being. And as an entrepreneur, you have the best possibility, the best opportunity to do that, because you get to decide what your business is all about. And by that, you then can decide what your life is about, decide what your business is about, and have your business be an expression of what your life is about. Now, that doesn't mean you have to work hard. I mean, my business runs pretty much on its own. But my business is a reflection of what my life is about. What I've decided is the meaning of my life. And that calls forth, it brings forward a higher level of way of operating. So, I was in previous businesses before, just like before I started Strategic Profits, where we had a publishing company for parents. And I didn't write any of the material, and I didn't really care about the material. I just wanted to grow the business, and it was successful, and, all that. I would never do that at Strategic Profits, be that disconnected, because I care so much more about what we're doing and who we're affecting, and that shines through. I mean, I hear that all the time from people who meet me talking about how obvious it is that I care, and I do, and it's not. It comes across because it's valid and true and it's authentic, and the way that that's developed is by what I've just said.
Yeah, and I would imagine for you it also makes the satisfaction of helping people even greater, because you've been there yourself. So those emotions are associated, that you know what you're going through, you know what the end result would be of the one that you help.
Yeah, no doubt. But it could be anything for anyone. I mean, really, I think most entrepreneurs don't recognize this amazing opportunity that they have to use their business to create a more meaningful life. Not because the business is sucking the life out of them, which would be the opposite, but to have the business be an expression of who you decided you wanted to be and the impact you wanted to have. And it's playing at a totally different level. But what happens is that when you play that game at that level, you make more money, your business is more successful, you can end up working less because your team cares more. It's kind of counterintuitive. By making your business mean more, it actually needs less from you.
So another thing I've heard you talk about a lot is that how important it is to stand out from the crowd. And I remember, if it's your quote or if it's someone else, the thing about that, oftentimes it's better to be different than it is to be better in the market. So how do you see that tie into what we just talked about and the explanation you just gave?
Well, I think everyone, I agree with that. That when it comes to being noticed and standing out, it is better to be different than better, because better is subjective, and it's very hard to determine whether something's better or not unless you're fully immersed in it. Whereas different, if it's different enough, it's pretty obvious that it is different. And so what's different catches our attention. We're hardwired that way. So so how you are going to be different is really somewhat dependent on how you specifically as a person are different. And what I mean by that is that, to give a couple examples, one way that when I want to stand out in the market, one way I approach it is, I think, sprint versus marathon, right? Because all my life, in school and in college and etc., I was always able to go really, really hard when I needed to, cramming, stuff like that. And so you could say that mentally I know how to sprint. Whereas when I was in college learning languages, that was much more difficult for me because that requires a marathon mentality. So most people in the marketplace, from my opinion, are running marathons. They day to day, kind of like the continual grind of business, which means that I can come in at certain points of time and sprint. And what I mean by sprint is do a lot more, be a lot more active, put out a lot more stuff, like in a short period of time that rises me above because I'm sprinting, everyone else is running slow. But that's because of who I am, right? Now, another part of the way I'm different is that I'm an extremely curious person, and I have a great drive to learn more consistently. So I'm always exploring new stuff and always spending a lot of time doing that. And so another way that I'm different is by bringing that material, the best of the best that I find, and working, and luckily based on the success I've had, I get to not only pursue that stuff, but when I find something interesting, like then I can talk to experts in that field. I can take that material back into the entrepreneurial world. And so just by doing that, like what I'm offering is totally different. Because like I'm bringing stuff into the entrepreneurial world that other people haven't. But that's not necessarily a strategy, although you could say it is. It's really just who I am, and it's an expression of who I am. So what I would say is that look at what makes you different as a person, and how can you leverage that in your business so that other people can see that difference. Now, if your business is bigger already, then you can look at what are the ways that people on my team are different, what are the competencies that we have that are different, and how can we make that obvious? Or what makes us different, and how can you do that? Right? Like the fact of what you mentioned, that the majority of online gurus like around today were coached by me. Like that's one of the things that makes our company different. And we talk about that, and so we don't keep it a secret, and most people know that, and that's one way that the business is different from other businesses, let's say. But in the beginning, especially of the business, and if you're going to build a personality-based business, then the best place to look, the easiest place to look, the most effective way to be different is to think about who are you and what is different about you than most people, because we're all unique, and how can that be leveraged in a way that it's obvious to others.
Yeah. And the sort of, many would say, the luxury that you have of, for example, now for the last 2 or 3 years studying something, really getting deep into a subject, and then being able to present that and create program around that. That's also a byproduct of you having a large fan base that almost no matter what you present them with, enough people would be interested that it would also make it worthwhile for you to pursue that, right?
Right, and that's what happens over time. I mean, if I don't know that this applies to everyone who's watching right now, because it kind of depends if you're in the information business or coaching and service. Like, if you're selling a physical product, then what I'm about to say might not apply, because I have lots of clients who don't do what I do, right? But what I said earlier about that which is most personal is most general. Every one of these intellectual pursuits that I go down is because I think I'm going to find great value for myself there. That's how it always starts. And it's in that pursuit for myself that as I'm going through it, and the belief that whatever I struggle with, whatever I want, other people struggle with, they want. And so by working on myself and following that drive, I already know that if I can solve the problem for myself or improve myself in that way, or improve my business in that way, that there's a market for it, because I'm not the only person on the planet who's experienced this. And that is quite freeing, because it allows me to really, it gives me greater incentive to solve my own problems, right? I'm not only going to solve it for myself, I'm going to solve it for a lot of other people, and I'm going to be paid handsomely in the process. In addition to that, though, I get to work on stuff that is the absolute most interesting thing to me in the moment. And the greatest productivity secret in the world is to be passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah. So one of the things that I hear a lot about and see also with people I work with is that they have a hard time picking a narrow enough niche. And what you just talked about, isn't that also one of the reasons why that's important? That once you have that niche, you have the connection with the audience, that then you can spread out to other things after you build that in a more narrow niche.
Yeah, you certainly can. And um, the what I would say is that another way, like, there's nothing wrong with trying to figure out what niche you should be in, right? It's an important thing to think about. Another way of coming at it, though, is about who is it that you really want to be, and serving what niche would allow you to be that. For me, like, working with entrepreneurs is great. It's what I want to do. I didn't do. Had I done any research to pick a niche or to determine the products, I wouldn't have had anywhere near the success I've had. And I'm not therefore, because, like, when I was first starting out, like, in the internet marketing space, talking about business building, nobody had any interest. There was no searches. There was no nothing. So to think that there was a market there, and had I done any kind of market analysis or niche analysis, it just would have came up empty. Now, I'm a big fan of market research and competitive intelligence and all that, so anybody listening, do not think that I'm discounting that. But if you take what I was saying earlier about that you have this way of creating meaning in your life, which is taking on a project that is a cause bigger than yourself that helps you become much better than how you wound up being, then recognize that the niche that you decide on has some impact on that decision. And that if it's purely just what you think is going to be easiest, if business is just a place that you dedicate some hours a week or a day, and that's all it is and gives you money, and then everything else is what's important, then maybe that's fine. But, it's kind of like the problem I always had with the 4-hour work week is, and I know Tim, and I've got a couple problems with it, but the main problem that I had with it is that if you only want to work 4 hours a week, then you're really in the wrong business. You should have a business that you want to be involved with. Now, like I said earlier, I don't work that hard. I don't spend a lot of time in my business. But it's not because I don't want to. Like, I enjoy what it is I do. I enjoy the time we're spending on this webinar right now, or chat, and I enjoy the things that I do in my business. Ideally, you're in a business, you're in a niche that you care about, that you want to impact the people that are there, and that that shows through. And it's a colossal waste of your life to be in a niche that you don't care about, that then you dedicate some percentage of your life to it. It just doesn't make sense to me. One of the reasons that, to just take an extreme case, or two extreme cases, one of the reasons that Steve Jobs was as successful as he was because he sweated every detail, because he wanted, like, the things that he released to be perfect, because he cared, right? Like, he wanted, he raised everyone to a higher standard, right? Like, he wasn't happy with the way they wound up being. He had a cause bigger than himself and the people that worked for him, and so he made them work to that level. And Sam Walton, who started Walmart, he wanted to be the cheapest. He wanted customers to be able to buy everything at the absolute lowest price, and so everything in his whole business was aligned towards that, and that's what gave his life meaning. So you don't have to be Steve Jobs or Sam Walton. You can just be you. But ideally, the niche is not only chosen for economic factors, although that's important. It's also chosen because you recognize that you're making a major decision about the direction of your life.
Yeah. So another thing I'd like to hear your input on is the whole thing about storytelling and story selling and branding. And now I haven't talked about the authenticity and ideally the authenticity being a byproduct of having a bigger cause. How much do you see the importance of storytelling and also of how much to share about yourself, your struggles, successes, things like that?
Well, we live in story, you know. Our lives are stories. So, it's always interesting when people say they don't know how to tell a story because they're telling stories all the time. So everyone knows how to tell a story, and people like stories, and stories are one of the most effective ways to convey information. So that's always been the case. That will always be the case. The the more real that you can be in your stories, the better that they're going to be, the more effective they're going to be. I would say that the only time that you really don't want to share something in a story is if you think it damages your credibility. And that's generally it should be an extremely rare occurrence. I make in a lot of my marketing, majority, whatever, I don't hide the fact that I struggled when I got online. But I use it to an advantage to explain why I struggled and what changed for me and things of that nature. I guess I would say that my philosophy about it would be to err on the side of sharing too much. But that's based on the idea that I want to live the most exciting life that I can, and I want to be engaged in life. I've spent time in my life where I was kind of numb and kind of going through the motions, and I didn't like it. And sharing something intimate sometimes can be a scary thing. But when you're scared, you also feel most alive.
Yeah.
And, you should be smart enough to be able to share almost anything and be able to frame it or position it in a way that makes you able to be a better option, a better choice for your prospects and clients because of it. And so my belief is that unless it's something you really want to keep a secret for some reason, I think you're better off being more transparent. I mean, the world can be an unforgiving place and a judgmental place, but we all make mistakes. We all have challenges. And it's very comforting to know that when you find people that are willing to admit that.
Yeah. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so on a more tactical level, what do you see maybe for the next year or something that is going to be some of the best leverage things? For example, you were the first one who really got massive success with webinars. Do you have any tactical stuff that you could recommend will be of extra value going into, let's say, 2015?
I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, so I would start with that. What I would say is that the newest and greatest. The reason, like when I wrote what you were talking about. I wrote a webinar. I wrote a report on webinars. I think back in 2008 or something, talking about automated webinars and how they were going to be the next thing, and that's what got a lot of the gurus to start using automated webinars. And that certainly, I didn't invent it, but I certainly was the person who kind of alerted the market that this was going to be the next thing. Now, the reason I was such a big fan of it and knew that it was going to be such a big thing is because of the ability to be able to really have a lot more ability to serve relevant messages based on the actions that prospects took. Like when prospects downloaded one of my free reports, I didn't know what page they stopped at. I didn't know if they ever read it. I didn't know any of that stuff. With a webinar, I could know exactly when they stopped watching, if they got on and stopped. If they never came on, I would know that. If they watched the whole thing, I would know that. If they watched the whole thing and bought, I would know that. So I knew every outcome, and so therefore I could kind of make we could have messages to every type of response. And that was really powerful, and that made a big difference, and we made a lot of money from it, and we still do. But what I would say is that I want to highlight is that the webinar that fuels my business even today is a modified version of the report I wrote back in 2006. And it is, so while the webinar was very effective at making us a lot of money, it was just another mechanism to broadcast a message that we had refined over the years that has made us money in multiple formats in multiple different ways. What most people, I think, miss is that they don't have that message. When you have the message, or you have the way of selling your product, of making someone who was less desirable of it when they started to be totally different and want it by the time you're done, then every mechanism that comes or goes will be available to you. And that you won't really have to do much to make that mechanism work. It's not, you know, I am agnostic to the medium that we use, because I know that the message works, and I don't care what format we need to get it into prospects' hands, because I know that if a prospect consumes it, they're worth a lot more to me as soon as they consume it. So what I would say is that I think knowing about what the next great thing is useful. I'm not saying it's not, because like at the end of the day, the people that jump on the next thing do get an advantage. But if you think that that makes up for having this core message that you've already refined that really sells what it is you do or what you have to offer, then you're really now looking for a mechanism to make up for a void in your business, and that's really what opportunity seekers do, and that's what causes most people to fail. The mechanism will only be as good as the message. If the message is great, then every new mechanism, especially if you hop on them early enough, will deliver even more. But if you don't have that mechanism, then it doesn't matter if it's today's greatest technology or if it's next year's greatest technology. You don't have what you need to make those things work for you.
Yeah, and my suggestion would be on a tactical level is to find out who are the most successful people, either in your own niche or in general, or especially in internet marketing, and look for what they're actually doing, and maybe even looking at their JV blogs where they offer different affiliate prices for the best affiliates, and see who has the highest prices, because those are the one who makes the most money, and then look for what they're doing. Because that will always be what's on the forefront, is what are the most successful people doing, and also look for what type of advertising happens again and again and again, because that's only if it works. Otherwise, people won't repeat it unless they're like huge brands, of course.
Right. Definitely.
Cool. So another thing. Maybe on a more tactical level, but also ties into what we talked about so far, is I'd like to hear your view on price psychology. Do you see some trends in that? What's going to be more important, or where is going to be the biggest opportunity going into the future in terms of how you price yourself in your market?
um, I've got lots of thoughts about pricing, but tell me more what you'd like me to talk to on that.
In terms of how important is it or how not is it to compete on price versus competing on brand or message or personality? Do you see it important to be price competitive, or on the other hand, that it's a question about figuring out how high can you charge, because that gives you extra freedom in terms of advertising or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, um, ideally, you'd never want to compete on price. Now, there are certain areas that might be difficult, but the majority of product categories, niches, what have you, you don't have to compete on price. Now, you know, it's just a fact that we associate higher value with higher prices. And, things that are more expensive, we tend to think are better. I command a premium price. I just got off the phone with a colleague of mine, where we were talking about pricing and how nice it is to be able to have premium pricing, and that we would never want to do anything to interfere with that. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have, like, at time to time, like a free shipping and handling offer. But that's for a front-end product where the goal is to kind of bring people into our circle, and not anything that's more of the higher-end stuff. And, there is a lot of benefit to being able to price higher. Now, in order to price higher, you got to get more value. That's generally the way it works. Now, most small businesses don't have a great brand. They don't have the brand penetration, so to speak, to warrant just a higher price, because that's what they are. Now, if you happen to be in some kind of advice business, service business, you can develop a reputation pretty quickly. One way to build a brand is be prolific. The more of your stuff out there, the more your name will be remembered, but do it the way that I suggested earlier about getting more leverage out of a few great things than doing a lot of things. I think most people price themselves too cheaply. I think that it's what you have a product. Instead of thinking, like, what do I need to sell this at so that people will buy it, and then kind of fighting with yourself about price. Think about, maybe you identify that price, but then you identify a much higher price, and then you start thinking about, what would I have to include, what would I need to highlight, what would need to be different about this thing for people to pay that price. And you should be constantly thinking about the latter. How do you have a higher price and yet still be the more desirable option? Because what that forces you to do is to differentiate your value, which really helps you stand apart and allows for a lot of the fighting of price point to happen below you, which is undermining of those companies. And when someone wants better, whatever that looks like in your market, you'll automatically be put in that equation because of the price point. So what I would say is that just because commerce is growing, just because the internet's growing, you can assume that there will be more price competition. Because of that, it was never a good place to be to begin with, to be in the competitive pricing game. But even more so in the future, it'll be even that worse. So you don't want to be in that game. And so the goal is to get out of that game. The way you get out of that game is by looking at how you can increase the value of what is being offered in a way that makes what you're offering more desirable at that high price than what others are offering at a low price. Can't hear you, Michael.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. So one of the last things I wanted to ask you about is how do you see the importance of networking going into the future? Obviously, for an event like Elevate 2014, that's one of the biggest values of attending is the networking that goes on in a place like that. How do you see networking going into the future?
It's incredibly important. I mean, first of all, we're much more isolated, especially, you know, if your business has any kind of major online component, you're isolated even more so.
Mm.
So there's that. But networking, there's never been, I'm not a natural networker, and I'm a pretty shy person. You know, at this stage of my life, like, I can get away with it because people come over to me.
Mm.
But I've always made more money from any event I've ever been to, just in the contacts that I did make. And not because I was like really trying to do that, because that's so not me, but just because, you know, I met a lot of like-minded people, and there were deals to be done or things that I learned that from one of them that I was able to apply, or, you know, just whatever. So there's a tremendous amount of benefit to being in a room with a lot of other like-minded people like you trying to accomplish the same goal. Part of transcending how you wound up being is by operating out of your comfort zone, right? Doing things that in the past you didn't do because they didn't feel comfortable. Because what defines your comfort zone is partly the way you're currently wired. So one way of kind of becoming more, better, whatever you want to call it, is by getting out of your comfort zone. The other way is by having relationships that pull you forward. And it is like-minded relationships that make it easiest to pull you forward. So just like, you know, I play tennis a lot. When I play with someone better than me, I get better. When you're in a room with that many people, you're going to find people that are 2 steps ahead of you, and they're going to help pull you forward just by having the conversations with them. Not because they're even having to try to pull you forward. It's just the way it works. You know, we're social animals. So it's not only the connections that you make as far as like commerce being able to be transacted, which generally is the case. It's also the re-engagement in your business by just getting some of that energy, in addition to interacting with people in a way that raises your game, makes you more excited about getting back in your business and accomplishing things and having a better perspective of what's possible based on the conversations that you had and the people that you met. So you know, life is lived in the space between you and other people. And it took me a long time in my life to figure that, to really kind of appreciate that. Yeah. That I experienced my life in relation to other people. And that being the case, which people do you want to experience life with? And ideally, it's people that are on the same journey as you.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point to think about, also seeing it as a potential way of getting outside your comfort zone. So, you know, I would suggest that if you are really good at networking, then you should absolutely go to events like that, because hey, it's what you do best. It's high leverage, and if you're not, then it's a good way of practicing getting outside of your comfort zone, which as an entrepreneur is a good thing to be able to, right?
Necessary.
Cool. So talking about Elevate 2014 before we close out this webinar, can you share what you're going to be talking about? You have 2 presentations.
Yes, I have 2 presentations. One is going to be about what is really the necessary knowledge and the right approach to growing a business. And the way I'm saying it right now probably doesn't sound incredibly sexy, but what I can tell you is that the majority of people do it wrong, and they have completely backwards approach to what I'm going to share. And the approach that I'm going to share is the approach that has made me successful, has made the majority of online gurus successful, as well as, it's the reason why I've been paid by Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo, and work with some of the biggest companies in the world. So I'm going to share with you an entirely, really a different approach to building a business. And what it will show you is you're going to see how when you compare that with the way you're doing it, you're going to see that you are working harder than you need to, that you're making less than you need to, and that there is a way that your business can be a lot more enjoyable, you can make more money, and you can work less, and it's all within that way of approaching a business. So that's going to be one of the presentations I give, and that's kind of what, I guess, made me known, that area of knowledge. The second presentation, what's that?
That's what you're showing there is some of the best material from the coaching program that made you famous, right? Where you help them double their profit and cut their work time in half. Cool.
Yeah, so that's that. And then also, I'll be sharing, for the first time publicly, brand new information that never shared publicly before. I'll be doing a workshop about 2 weeks prior to that for 8 people on the same content, which is really about the easiest way for me to describe it is based on what we were talking about earlier, that the way you wound up being right now is not ideally situated for you to be the most successful entrepreneur you can be, and that many of the problems that you might be facing in your business are not business problems, they are entrepreneurial problems in the way you are. And so what I've been working on for the last couple of years is what is required to make that shift so that you see the world differently, you operate in the world differently, and how does that happen? And what are the steps towards it? And so it's a transformational process for entrepreneurship. In other words, how do you go from seeing the world the way you currently see the world to seeing the world the way the most successful entrepreneurs see the world? How do you see the world in a way where you're not a procrastinator, you're not a perfectionist or anything like that, but that you seize each day excited about growing your business? How is it that you shift your perspective so that you see the best marketing opportunities in front of you that in the past you were blind to, and so forth and so on? So, it's based on the idea that, as you said at the beginning, like I charge $3,000 an hour, I charge $15,000 a day, I have people fly in every month to spend time with me, and they bring their business to me, and I see things that they don't see, and point stuff out to them, and then they go back, they make a lot of money, and they're happy, and they come back again, and that's kind of the way it works. And the question is, though, is why don't they see what I see? And one answer could be that they're too close to it, and there's certainly an element of truth to that. But the other part is that they have a different perspective. And so I've been working on what needs to change in someone's perspective. So not only do they see once what I'm pointing out to them, but they're able to see what I see when I look at their business, what Jay Abraham sees when he looks at their business, what other great marketing and business builders see when we look at businesses. And I have figured not only have I figured that out, I figured out what needs to be done in order to make that happen. And so I'm going to be sharing that, and that I'm incredibly excited about because I have been working on it for a few years, and this is my next big thing for me, and I plan on spending quite a significant part of my life now advancing this, and this will be the very first time that I unveil it, and I am extremely certain that people who are exposed to it will be profoundly affected and will be significantly more successful just by being exposed to it.
Actually, I can vouch for that sort of indirectly because I just happened to have a major breakthrough just last weekend, and it was actually taking one of the concepts I learned from you and applying it in a different way where I simply hadn't seen it or thought about it before, and that sort of aha slash oh experience was just so profound. There's a question around what you just shared, if you wouldn't mind answer it.
Sure.
Someone asked, so what is it that makes you see things differently? If you could share a specific example.
Sure. I mean, there's many components to it, so I can't answer all of it, but
Yeah, of course.
I certainly can give some information about them. Well, I'm gonna so I'm not even gonna try and break it all out. I'm gonna talk about a specific part of it. Okay. So there's the way you wound up being, which is kind of hardwired in, and that takes time to change. But then there's also the paradigm that you live in, what you believe, what you think business is all about, what you think marketing is all about, or business growth is all about. And you live in these paradigms, and they define what you see and what you don't see. And I'm going to actually, as we're talking here, I'm going to mention a article that people can find online if they are really interested in what I'm talking about here. Hold on. And then we'll get back. So hold on. Just give me 1 second here. I'll go to Sense. Here we go. Okay. All right. So, the example I like to give is that when I look up at the stars, I just see a bunch of stars. If I spent 4 hours with an astronomer, they would be able to point out things to me, and they would give me language to describe certain things I'm seeing in the sky, and then from that point forward, the sky would never look the same to me. If I walk through a forest, all I see are trees. If I walk through the forest with a forester, and they start pointing out different things in the forest, no walk through the forest will ever be the same for me. So distinctions, which live in language, but it's not just language, are what gives you access to seeing things that you currently can't see. And, it's like if I look at a marketing piece and someone else looks at a marketing piece, in general, I'm going to see a lot more because I have more distinctions about what is being done. Like why that first paragraph is there. And I have a lot of knowledge about it, distinctions, ways of describing it that allow me to see certain things that other people will not see. So that's part of the process. There's an article that I'm sure that if you searched like in quotes for, you could find it. It's called The Language of Discovery. So if you put The Language of Discovery in quotes, file type PDF, you can find it. It's from the Journal of Biomedical Discovery and Collaboration, and it's written by the Dean of Dartmouth Medical School, one of the best, Ivy League schools out there. And what it's about is that the discovery process is in the ability to language the unknown. And so one way that you get access to seeing things that you currently don't is by being given new distinctions. And it's not just about learning a new word, but it is about being given words that with an understanding of what they are so that you then start seeing the world differently. And that happens over time anyway. You see the world differently today than you did 5 years ago. You notice things that you didn't notice before, but there is a way to greatly accelerate that. And that's an area that I've been spending a lot of time on. Like, what are the distinctions that you should have that you probably don't have when it comes to marketing, when it comes to business growth? And it's not just, like I said, giving you a definition, because if it was that simple, you could just study a glossary. This is different than that.
yeah, this and I would say a lot of the things that you talked about tonight is on a different level than probably a lot of people are used to, because it's not okay, do this and buy this and this happen. This is on a more fundamental level, as I understand it, right? Rich?